For 30 years, Colonel Marcus Webb did something most people never get to do. He shaped the men who shaped the world, not through politics or business or media, through discipline, through training, through the patient transfer of knowledge from one mind to another. He trained elite operators, men and women who went into situations that most people couldn't imagine. Impossible odds, impossible terrain, impossible choices, and they came back alive. Not because they were born fearless, but because Marcus Webb had taught them how to think, how to observe, how to remain calm when everything around them was chaos. Those operators never forgot him. Years later, they would talk about Colonel Webb the way other people talk about life-changing moments. A conversation with him was a recalibration. Being in his presence meant understanding something about yourself you didn't understand before. Then in 2019, something changed. Marcus Webb was 64 years old when he walked into the federal building in downtown Chicago on a Tuesday morning in March. He was carrying a mop, a bucket, a collection of cleaning supplies, and something else that nobody could see. The weight of a decision to disappear. He pushed a cart down the hallway of the building. The cart was exactly the kind you see in 1,000 office buildings across America. Metal frame, wheels that squeaked slightly, compartments for supplies, a small trash bin attached to the side. The cart moved smoothly because Marcus had maintained it well. Everything in his life was maintained well. His uniform was gray, not fancy, not new. It was the uniform of a man who cleaned buildings for a living. His name tag read simply, Marcus Maintenance. That's all anyone needed to know. That was all anyone wanted to know. For 3 years, Marcus had been living under the radar, not running from something. That's what most people assumed, and it was comfortable to let them assume it. He was running towards something. He was running towards a life where nobody expected anything from him, where nobody asked him to lead, where nobody wanted him to fix things. He had spent 30 years fixing things. Now he wanted to clean floors and go home. The security cameras in the federal building captured his movements throughout the day. If you were to watch the footage, you would see a man of remarkable consistency. He arrived at 5:47 a.m. He cleaned the lobby first, then moved to the hallways in exact order. He knew every floor, every office, every blind spot. He moved with purpose, but without urgency. He was efficient, but never hurried. By 2 p.m. he was finished. By 2:15 p.m. he had punched out and was walking to the parking garage. No one paid attention to him. That was the point. His coworkers barely noticed him except for Rosa. She was a middle-aged Latina woman who also worked in maintenance. Rosa had suggested more than once that Marcus was overqualified for the job. Rosa would say, "Marcus, you're too smart for this. You should be doing something else." Marcus would smile, not in a way that was dismissive, but in a way that suggested he understood something Rosa didn't yet understand. "The work is honest, Rosa. That's all that matters." Rosa didn't believe him, but she respected him. That was enough. Marcus had learned something in his years of disappearing. Respect was different from recognition. You could earn one without pursuing the other. You could be completely unknown and still be deeply respected by the people who actually saw you. But there was a problem with invisibility. Problems always find invisible people, because invisible people can't defend themselves. Invisible people have no allies. Invisible people don't matter to the system that protects the loud and visible. Detective Jackson Morris didn't know any of this yet. He walked past Marcus 100 times in those first 3 years without really seeing him. Morris was the kind of man who saw rank and uniform and badge. Everything else in the world was background noise. Jackson Morris was 47 years old. He had been a police detective in Chicago for 22 years. For the last 8 of those years, he had been stuck at the same rank. 8 years of watching younger men get promoted. 8 years of watching the department change in ways he didn't like. 8 years of growing bitter in a way that had become less like a feeling and more like a personality trait. Morris had a file. Not an official file, though there was one of those too, but the kind of file that existed in people's memories and conversations. The kind of file that said, Jack Morris doesn't play by new rules. Jack Morris is old school. Jack Morris doesn't care about diversity. Jack Morris doesn't care about sensitivity training. Jack Morris cares about getting the job done. But what Morris actually cared about was power, and he was losing it. His face was thick. Not fat, but thick in the way that suggested someone who had spent years clenching his jaw. His eyes were the kind that didn't show much, but underneath the lack of expression was a kind of constant anger. The kind of anger that doesn't need a reason. The kind of anger that just is all the time like an underlying hum that never stops. Morris wore his uniform like armor. Not the uniform of a person who believed in the institution, but the uniform of a person who believed the institution was the only thing protecting him from a world he didn't understand anymore. He walked past Marcus Webb 200 times in the hallway before he really noticed him, and when he finally noticed, it was because of something small, something that would normally be invisible. Marcus didn't acknowledge him. It was a Tuesday morning in March, the same Tuesday that would later mark the beginning of everything. Morris was walking down the hallway talking to his partner, Officer Chen. They were discussing a case, something routine, something unimportant. Morris was in the middle of a sentence when he passed Marcus. Without thinking, Morris's eyes flicked toward the janitor. He was accustomed to a certain dynamic in the world. When he wore his badge and walked down a hallway, people noticed. People's eyes moved toward him. People's posture changed slightly. People showed deference. Marcus's eyes didn't move. His posture didn't change. He continued mopping the floor with the same methodical motion he had been using before Morris appeared and would continue using after Morris left. Marcus existed in a space that Morris's presence didn't affect at all. This bothered Morris in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was like being ignored by someone who should have been paying attention. It was like being invisible to someone who should have been seeing him. Morris was not accustomed to being invisible. He was accustomed to being the man with the badge, the man with the authority, the man who walked into a room and changed the temperature of that room just by being there. He was accustomed to power. And in that moment, in that hallway, in the presence of a quiet man with a mop, Morris felt like he didn't have any. Marcus had a routine. It was a routine he had refined over 3 years to the point where it was almost meditative. Wake up at 4:30 a.m. Coffee, no breakfast. Drive to the Federal Building. Arrive by 5:47 a.m. Push the cart to the maintenance closet. Begin with the lobby. The lobby of the Federal Building was a large space with marble floors, tall ceilings, and a kind of emptiness that only government buildings have. An emptiness that comes from being a space where important things happened, but where you weren't supposed to actually feel comfortable. Marcus cleaned the lobby with the same attention he would have paid to a surgical theater. Every detail mattered. Every floor needed to shine. As he worked, his mind wandered the way a mind does during repetitive work. He thought about his training days. He thought about the men and women he had taught. He thought about how many of them were probably still alive because of something he had shown them years ago. A technique, a principle, a way of thinking. He didn't regret his choice to disappear, but he was aware always of the cost of not being known, the cost of not being part of the thing you had built, the cost of watching from the margins while other people took credit or made mistakes or changed the system in ways you didn't agree with. But that was the deal he had made with himself. Invisibility in exchange for peace. It had seemed like a fair trade at the time. On that Tuesday morning in March, Marcus was finishing the lobby when something shifted. It was small. It was the kind of thing that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus had spent 30 years training himself to notice everything. He had trained himself to feel when the air in a room changed, to sense when the balance of a space shifted. Morris was watching him, not casually, not the way you watch someone without meaning to. Morris was actively observing Marcus, and the observation wasn't the kind of observation that comes from curiosity. It was the kind that comes from judgment, from hunting. Marcus recognized it immediately. He had seen that look before, many times. In his training, he had taught people to recognize predatory behavior in others. Not the kind of predatory behavior that lives in dark alleys, the kind that lives in institutions, the kind that wears a badge. Morris stood at the far end of the lobby talking to Officer Chen, but his attention was entirely on Marcus. Marcus could feel it. The weight of that attention, the intention behind it. And Marcus understood something in that moment with absolute clarity. His invisibility had just ended. The contract with peace had just been broken. He didn't panic. Panic would have been a wasted response. Instead, he finished mopping the section he was working on, pushed his cart back toward the maintenance closet, and went about his day as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. 3 days later, Morris made his first real move. Marcus was in the break room of the Federal Building. He was sitting alone eating a sandwich he had brought from home. The break room was a small space with a microwave, a refrigerator, a table, and 4 chairs. It was the kind of place where people tried not to spend too much time. It felt temporary, even though it was permanent. Morris walked in without purpose. He was ostensibly getting coffee, but he didn't want coffee. What he wanted was to establish something. What he wanted was to make clear in a way that wouldn't be official enough to be reported that the hierarchy was different from what Marcus had been assuming. Morris poured coffee slowly. Then he turned and sat directly across from Marcus at the table. Not 5 seats away, not to the side, directly across. Close enough that not acknowledging each other would be actively rude in a normal interaction. So Morris said. His voice was casual in the way that casual can sometimes mean predatory. "How long have you been working here?" Marcus swallowed his sandwich. He didn't rush. He didn't show surprise. 3 years, Detective. And before that, what were you doing working other jobs? Marcus said. Which was true, though incomplete. Morris smiled. It was not a warm smile. You don't talk much, do you? I work better in quiet, Marcus said. I bet you do, Morris said. And then without another word he stood up. Abandoned his coffee on the table, he hadn't even poured it, and left the break room. That night Marcus sat in his apartment and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Worry, not panic, not fear, but the low-level concern that comes from understanding that you are now visible to someone, and that visibility might be dangerous. The next morning, Morris made his second move. He was waiting near Marcus's supply closet when Marcus arrived. This was earlier than usual. Morris had come in early specifically to be there. We've got a problem, Morris said. Not greeting just beginning. Marcus waited for clarification. The 3rd floor. It looks like garbage. I got a complaint. Multiple complaints, actually. Looks like someone's not doing their job. Marcus knew the 3rd floor was immaculate. He had cleaned it personally the day before. He kept detailed mental notes of his work, but he understood what was happening. This wasn't about the 3rd floor. I'll check it again, Detective, Marcus said. You do that, Morris said. And then he left. Marcus went to the 3rd floor. It was exactly as clean as he had left it. But he understood. The point was not whether the floor was clean. The point was establishing that Morris's word was enough to create doubt. Over the next week, Morris increased the intensity of his campaign. He began to spill things near Marcus's supply closet, coffee, papers, water, and then gestured to the mess in a way that suggested Marcus should have prevented it. He began to make comments to other officers within Marcus's hearing about the quality of the building's maintenance. He began to spend time near the areas Marcus was cleaning, watching, with an expression that suggested he was looking for something wrong. Officer Chen Morris's partner was clearly uncomfortable with this behavior, but he didn't stop it. He just grew more quiet when Morris was engaged in his campaign, more withdrawn, more complicit by silence. Rosa noticed what was happening before anyone else did. Rosa had been in the building longer than Marcus. She had seen these patterns before. She had seen what happened when someone with authority decided they didn't like someone without it. She pulled Marcus aside one afternoon near the supply closet, making sure they were alone. "Morris has been asking about you," she said quietly. "He asked me yesterday where you worked before, what neighborhood you lived in, if you had family, if I knew anything unusual about you." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Rosa said. "I told him I didn't know anything and it was none of his business. But Marcus men like that. They don't stop. Once they decide they need to hurt you, they keep going until something breaks." "I know," Marcus said. And he did know. He had studied this kind of behavior in training. He understood the psychology of it. He understood what came next if he wasn't careful. That night, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to hide anymore. But he wasn't going to fight back either. Not directly. Not with anger or confrontation. Instead, he was going to do the thing he had been trained to do. Observe. Document. Plan. Morris filed a formal complaint with building management on the following Monday. The complaint alleged that the building's maintenance standards had declined significantly. The complaint was detailed and specific. Dates, locations, alleged lapses in cleaning protocols. The complaint was entirely false, but it was written in a way that made it sound professional and credible. Building management took the complaint seriously. They had to. Even though David Chen, the building director, had personally observed Marcus's work and knew it was excellent, he couldn't simply dismiss a complaint from a federal detective. He was now caught between loyalty to an employee and the need to show he was taking the complaint seriously. David Chen called Marcus into his office. It was a small office with a large window overlooking the city. David was a careful man. He chose his words with precision. "I got a complaint about your work," he said without preamble. "From Detective Morris. He's saying the standards have declined." Marcus waited for more information. "I want to be honest with you," David continued. "I've been watching your work for 3 years. It's excellent. It's the best work I've seen from any maintenance staff member. So I know this complaint isn't about your actual job performance." "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "But I also know what you're probably dealing with," David continued. "And I want you to understand, if you need anything, if this escalates in any way, you tell me. You don't go through normal channels. You come to me directly, because normal channels are how people like that operate." Marcus understood what David was saying. He was offering alliance. It was the first real ally Marcus had acquired in the federal building. Over the next 2 weeks, everything shifted. Security began stopping Marcus at checkpoints more frequently. Just routine checks, they would say. But they were checking his bags, asking him questions, making him wait longer than necessary. Building staff that had been friendly became distant. People who had said hello in passing stopped acknowledging him. Rosa asked him one afternoon, "Are you going to stay?" It was a simple question, but Marcus understood the deeper question beneath it. Was he going to accept the pressure? Was he going to leave quietly like Morris wanted him to? Was he going to run again? "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm going to stay." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. She seemed to be trying to understand something about him, trying to see what he was seeing, trying to understand how a man could be under this much pressure and not show any sign of it affecting him. "Then be careful," Rosa said. "Whatever you're planning, Be very, very careful." Meanwhile, Morris was conducting his own investigation. He ran Marcus's background check extensively. He searched for the kind of things that men like Morris are trained to look for: fraud, criminal activity, financial problems, substance abuse, anything that could be used as leverage. He found nothing. This frustrated Morris more than if he had found something, because a clean background meant that Morris couldn't explain what he was sensing. Morris couldn't explain why the quiet janitor seemed different somehow, why the quiet janitor didn't fear him the way people were supposed to fear him. Morris mentioned his suspicions to Officer Chen one afternoon while they were sitting in their patrol car waiting to respond to a call. "There's something off about that guy," Morris said. "The janitor." Chen didn't respond. "He's too aware," Morris continued. "He's too controlled. Guys don't move like that unless they've had training. Military training, probably. Or federal training. Or something." So what Chen said quietly. "So he's trained in something. So people who are trained don't usually work as janitors," Morris said, "unless they're hiding from something." Morris was close to the truth. But he was close in a way that was still completely wrong. Morris was assuming that Marcus was hiding in shame. Morris didn't understand that Marcus was hiding in choice. The bathroom incident happened on a Wednesday morning. Marcus was cleaning the men's bathroom on the second floor, restocking supplies, making sure everything was pristine. He had a routine for every bathroom in the building. He knew exactly how long each one should take. He knew exactly what level of cleanliness was required. Morris walked in while Marcus was in the middle of cleaning. Morris stood there for a moment watching. Then he did something calculated. He walked to the sink, splashed water everywhere, deliberately created a mess, and walked out. 5 minutes later, Morris came back with 2 other officers. "Look at this," Morris said to the officers, gesturing at the sink where he had just created the mess. "You call this clean? My grandmother could do better than this, and she's been dead for 5 years. The officers laughed. It was the kind of nervous laughter that comes when someone with authority is making a joke. The kind of laughter that was less about finding something funny and more about being on the right side of the power dynamic. Marcus was facing the toilet, continuing to clean, not turning around. He had heard every word. He knew exactly what had just happened. A public humiliation designed to establish dominance and create witnesses. "And you," Morris continued, now addressing Marcus directly. "Guys like you should be grateful for this work. You know that grateful. You're lucky anyone gave you this job in the first place." Marcus finished what he was doing. Then he turned around, moved to the sink where Morris had created the mess, and began cleaning it. He did this slowly, methodically, completely professionally. He cleaned around the officers while they stood there. He cleaned while Morris watched with a satisfied expression. When he was done, he moved back to the task he had been doing before. Morris and the officers left. That evening, Rosa called Marcus. She had heard about the bathroom incident. One of the officers had mentioned it to his friend, and the story had circulated through the building with the speed that these stories travel. "I'm reporting him," Rosa said without preamble. "I'm filing a complaint with HR. He can't treat you like that." "No," Marcus said. "Please don't." "Marcus." "Rosa. If you file a complaint, it makes this about HR procedures and documentation. I don't want that. I want it to be about what it actually is." "And what is it?" Rosa asked. "A test," Marcus said. "He's testing me to see if I'll break." Morris filed another complaint, this time with security. He alleged that Marcus might be smuggling materials in or out of the federal building. No evidence, no specific accusations, just the allegation itself, stated as fact to people in security who had no reason to doubt a federal detective. What happened next was the inevitable consequence of institutional paranoia. Security checkpoints became more frequent. They weren't polite suggestions anymore. They were stops. Actual stops. Marcus's bag was searched every single day. Questions were asked about where he was going, where he had been, what he was doing. The invisible man was now invisible in a different way. He was invisible as a person, but hypervisible as a suspect. Building staff that had been friendly became distant, not because they believed the allegations. Most of them didn't really know what the allegations were, but because being associated with a person under investigation was a risk. Being seen as friendly to a person under investigation could be read as complicity. Even the officers who worked in the building began to change their behavior. They would see Marcus and look away. They would see him and find sudden interest in their phones or their cases or anything other than acknowledging his presence. Officer Chen was the only one who seemed to struggle with this dynamic. Chen would see Marcus and there would be a moment where you could see internal conflict on his face. The conflict of a man who knew that what was happening was wrong, but who didn't have the courage to stop it. One afternoon, Chen actually spoke to Morris about it. They were in their patrol car, and Chen said quietly, "Jack, this is getting out of hand. The guy hasn't done anything." "How would you know?" Morris said. "He's exactly the type to hide things. The quiet ones always are." "Hide what?" Chen asked. "He has no record. He pays his taxes. He's never broken a law." "Not that we know of," Morris said. And then, as though this settled the matter, "Not that we've found yet." Morris was beginning to obsess about Marcus in a way that had nothing to do with actual suspicion and everything to do with the psychology of power. Morris needed Marcus to be something. Needed him to be criminal or dangerous or fraudulent. Because if Marcus was innocent, then what Morris was doing was just cruelty. And Morris didn't like to think of himself as cruel. He thought of himself as powerful. Morris acquired a burner phone. Not traceable. Not connected to anything. Just a phone that existed and could be made to seem like it belonged to Marcus. He planned carefully. He had Detective Chen's schedule memorized. He knew when Building Director David Chen would be on which floor. He knew the security camera blind spots in the building. He had walked the hallways enough times to map them out mentally. On a Thursday afternoon, Morris slipped the phone into Marcus's supply cart in a place where it would be easily visible to anyone who was looking for something suspicious. Then he arranged through his casual conversations with security to let them know that there had been a tip about contraband being brought into the building. The tip was, of course, from Morris himself, but security didn't need to know that. The following morning, security was positioned near Marcus's supply closet when he arrived. They had their supervisors with them. Building Director David Chen was also there. Morris had made sure to alert him that there was a situation that needed his attention. "We need to search your area," the security officer said. Not quite a question. Marcus nodded and stepped aside. It took 40 seconds for them to find the phone. It was right there, sitting in the cart, easily visible. Exactly where Morris had put it. "Is this yours?" the security officer asked. Marcus looked at the phone. He looked at David Chen. He looked at the assembled security personnel and the building director, and understood in that moment the precariousness of his position. "No," Marcus said. "I've never seen it before." "That's interesting," Morris said, stepping forward. He had been waiting out of sight, waiting for this exact moment. "Because we got a report about contraband being brought into the building. And here it is." David Chen looked troubled. He wanted to believe Marcus. But the phone was there. The phone was evidence. The phone was undeniable. "I didn't bring that in," Marcus said calmly. "Someone placed it there." "Who would do that?" Morris asked innocently. "And why?" "Because," Marcus said, meeting Morris's eyes directly for the first time since the game had begun. Someone needs to make me disappear. Morris's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his face. For just a moment, Marcus saw something underneath the authority and the confidence. He saw uncertainty. He saw someone realizing that maybe the person he was hunting could actually see. David Chen dismissed everyone and asked to speak with Marcus privately in his office. "Did you bring that phone in?" David asked. Not unkindly, just asking for clarity. "No," Marcus said. "I didn't." David looked at him for a long moment, and then something in his face softened. Because David had been a manager for a long time, and he had learned to read people the way you learn to read anything through repetition and attention. "I believe you," David said finally. "But I have a problem. That phone is real. It's sitting in your supply cart. I have security who saw it. I have a detective saying it came from you. The logical narrative is that you brought it in." "The logical narrative," Marcus said, "is often wrong." "Yes," David agreed. "Usually because someone is manipulating what logic can see." David picked up his phone and called Morris's supervisor. Not Morris directly. Morris's supervisor. And he filed a complaint. Not about Marcus, about Morris. The conversation between Marcus and Morris happened in the parking garage at 2:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. It was the kind of time when few people are around, when parking garages are particularly hollow, when a conversation between two people can feel very private. Marcus was walking to his car when Morris appeared, leaning against the driver's side door as if he had been waiting, which he had been. "So," Morris said, his voice lower than usual, almost conversational. "You think you're smart. You think you can play games with me." Marcus stopped a reasonable distance away. He didn't move closer. He didn't move away. He simply stopped and waited for Morris to continue. "You went to my supervisor," Morris said. "You filed a complaint. You tried to make me look like the bad guy." "I didn't file a complaint," Marcus said. "David did." "Because you manipulated him," Morris said. His voice was getting tighter. His jaw was clenching. "You made him believe your story. You made him think you were innocent." "I am innocent," Marcus said. Morris's hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it, but letting it rest on the butt of his gun in a way that was intentional, in a way that made clear what his options were, in a way that was a threat. "Here's what's going to happen," Morris said quietly. "You're going to take a leave of absence. You're going to disappear. You're going to vanish from this building and from this city. Because if you don't, I'm going to find something. I'm going to find something real. Something that sticks. And we both know that a guy like you can't survive federal charges. We both know that I have resources and you don't. We both know who wins when it's my word against yours." Marcus was quiet for a moment. And in that quiet moment, Morris saw something in his face that made Morris uncertain. Not fear, not anger, but something like recognition. Like Marcus was seeing Morris clearly for the first time. Really seeing him, understanding him completely. "Is that a threat?" Marcus asked. "That's a promise," Morris said. That night Marcus sat in his apartment. It was a small place. One bedroom, a kitchen, a living room with a single chair and a television he never watched. The walls were bare except for one photograph. It was a photograph from 30 years ago. Marcus in dress uniform. Young, proud, standing with a group of soldiers, all of them looking toward a future they couldn't see yet. Marcus looked at that photograph for a long time, and he made a decision. He was not going to hide anymore. But he was not going to fight with anger or confrontation. He was going to do what he had been trained to do. Observe. Document. Build a case so clear that it couldn't be denied. He spent the entire weekend gathering evidence. He went back through his documentation, mental notes he had kept of every day since Morris had begun watching him. He reconstructed dates. He reconstructed conversations. He remembered specifics. He wrote everything down. He went through his phone. He didn't have much. He wasn't the kind of man who documented his life through technology, but what he had, he organized. The few text messages from Rosa, the email from David Chen warning him about the complaints, the security incident report from Thursday morning when the phone was found. On Monday, Marcus called Rosa. "I need you to write down what you saw in the bathroom," he said. "I need you to put it in writing with dates and times. And I need you to be willing to sign it." Rosa understood what was happening. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Okay, I'll do it today." On Tuesday, Marcus requested a meeting with David Chen. "I need copies of all the complaints Morris filed," Marcus said, "and I need you to keep records of the timeline, when he started, what he said, how it escalated." David nodded. David understood too. David had been waiting for Marcus to do this. David had been hoping Marcus would do this. "There's something else you should know," David said. He pulled up emails on his computer. "I've been keeping records. Not officially, just notes. But I've documented every incident, every complaint Morris has filed. I have dates. I have specifics. And Marcus, I have something else. I have Morris's actual work schedule cross-referenced with the times he was harassing you. I can prove he was pursuing you intentionally, not incidentally." Marcus felt something shift inside him. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was the beginning of clarity, the understanding that he was not alone in this. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus moved with the patience of a man who had learned the value of patience. He photographed his work. Detailed images of the 3rd floor that Morris claimed was neglected. He collected timestamps from security footage. He documented every interaction, every threat, every moment of harassment with as much precision as a scientist gathering data. Officer Chen approached Marcus one afternoon while Morris was at a meeting. "I can't be part of this anymore," Chen said quietly. "What he's doing to you, I can't keep watching it." "Then don't watch," Marcus said. "If you're asked questions later, tell the truth." "The truth is," Chen said, "he's a good detective when he's not obsessed with something, but when he gets obsessed, he's not thinking clearly, and right now he's obsessed with you." "I know," Marcus said. "He's going to escalate," Chen said. "He's going to do something that crosses a line he can't come back from. Because he thinks there won't be consequences. Because he thinks nobody can touch him." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then I need to make sure there are consequences." The final piece came from an unexpected source. Marcus recorded one of Morris's threats in the hallway outside the break room. Illinois is a one-party consent state, which meant Marcus only needed to consent to record himself. The recording was legal. The recording was undeniable. In the recording, Morris could be heard clearly saying, "I'm going to find something on you, something that sticks, or I'm going to make something that sticks, and you won't be able to prove otherwise." It was direct. It was admissible. It was exactly what Marcus needed. On a Wednesday afternoon, Marcus left the federal building and walked to the FBI field office downtown. Not through official channels, not through the police department, but directly to the federal government. He requested a meeting with any agent investigating police corruption or abuse of authority in the Chicago Police Department. The agent who eventually met with him was Victoria Reeves. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of face that suggested she had seen a lot of institutional corruption in her career, and had decided to do something about it. Marcus sat across from her in a small interview room and laid out everything. The dates, the escalations, the planted phone, the recorded threat, Rosa's statement, David Chen's documentation, the photographs of his work, the timeline, the pattern. Agent Reeves listened without interrupting. She listened the way someone listens when they're genuinely trying to understand something. When she was done listening, she said, Detective Morris has been on our radar for 3 weeks. We've been quietly investigating his cases because we received a report that he might be planting evidence. We've been gathering our own documentation. What you've brought me today is going to be very valuable." "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "We wait," Reeves said. "Morris is about to make another move. I can feel it. He's getting desperate. Desperate people escalate. Desperate people make mistakes." "How do you know he's going to escalate?" Marcus asked. "Because you're still here," Reeves said. "You haven't disappeared. You haven't left the building. You haven't run. And that's going to drive him crazy. Men like Morris need to win. If you're still there, he's not winning. So he's going to try something bigger." Reeves was right. Morris had learned through his connections in the media that Channel 7 News was always looking for stories about police work, about how detectives solved crimes and protected the city. Morris had cultivated relationships with journalists over the years. He had given them tips. He had been helpful when he could be. Morris called one of those journalists, a reporter named Sarah Mitchell, and told her a story. "I've been investigating a suspicious character in the federal building," Morris said. "I believe he may be involved in smuggling contraband. I'm planning to make an arrest tomorrow morning. If you and a camera operator show up at the building around 8 a.m., you might get some good footage." Federal building, suspicious arrest, all very newsworthy. Sarah Mitchell, excited about the opportunity, agreed immediately. Morris then arranged for security to be positioned near Marcus's supply closet at 8:30 a.m. Morris arranged for witnesses to be present. Morris arranged for maximum visibility. Morris planned to arrest Marcus in front of a news camera. Marcus would be read his rights on camera. Marcus would be led away in handcuffs on camera. The narrative would be dedicated detective arrests, federal building, criminal. What Morris didn't know was that Agent Reeves had also arranged for someone to be present. A federal agent positioned near the hallway, watching, waiting, ready to intervene at the exact moment Morris committed the crime. Marcus went home that evening knowing what was going to happen the next day. He didn't sleep much. He sat in that apartment with that photograph of himself young and in uniform. And he thought about everything that had led him to this moment. He thought about his 30 years of training warriors. He thought about his choice to disappear. He thought about the cost of invisibility. He thought about the clarity that comes when you finally decide to stop hiding. Morris arrived at the federal building at 8:15 a.m. He had his partner, Officer Chen, with him. Chen looked uncomfortable, but Morris didn't notice. Morris was focused. Morris was ready to execute his plan. The news camera had already arrived. Sarah Mitchell was setting up with her cameraman in the lobby. Security was positioned. Witnesses were scattered through the hallway. Everything was in place. Morris walked to the supply closet where Marcus was organizing his cleaning supplies. The supply closet was small, narrow, the kind of space where you can't move freely. Morris pulled a second burner phone from his pocket. He had learned from his first attempt that having backup was important, and he placed it deliberately in Marcus's pocket, while Marcus's hands were occupied with supplies. "Got you," Morris said under his breath. Then Morris stepped back and called security. He raised his voice so that the camera crew in the lobby could hear. "I found the contraband," Morris said loudly. "The suspect has been smuggling federal building materials out through unauthorized channels." Security came quickly. Morris directed them to Marcus. Morris gestured to the phone in Marcus's pocket. "Check his pocket," Morris said. They did. They found the phone. Morris's smile was completely satisfied. This was the moment. This was when it all came together. This was when the quiet janitor became a federal criminal on camera. But before Morris could complete his next move, before he could officially state that Marcus was under arrest, before he could read him his rights in front of the news camera, Agent Victoria Reeves stepped from the hallway. She was alone. She was calm. She was absolutely certain. "Detective Morris," Reeves said quietly but clearly. "Step away from Mr. Webb." Morris's face went white, then red. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "This is none of your concern," Morris said. "This is a local police matter." "Actually," Reeves said, moving closer, "it is my concern. I have been monitoring this interaction for the past 90 seconds. I have watched you place that phone in his pocket. I have watched you attempt to fabricate evidence. I have watched you prepare to commit a crime." Morris tried to back away, but Reeves was between him and the exit. "Detective Jackson Morris," Reeves said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for evidence tampering, harassment, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You have the right to remain silent." Reeves read him his rights while the news camera that was supposed to film Marcus's arrest instead filmed Morris being handcuffed. The narrative that Morris had constructed. The narrative of him as a heroic detective solving a crime. Became instead the narrative of a corrupt officer committing a federal crime on camera. Officer Chen watched this happen with an expression that mixed relief with something deeper. The relief of not having to be complicit anymore. Security was confused. The news crew was confused. But Agent Reeves knew exactly what she was doing. She had all the evidence. She had all the documentation. She had all the witnesses. And now she had Morris, red-handed, attempting to plant evidence, captured on video. Morris was led away in handcuffs. The news crew filmed him being led away. But the story had changed. The story was no longer what Morris wanted it to be. Marcus stood in the hallway with security and David Chen and Agent Reeves, and he said nothing at all. He just stood there, calm, the same as he had been through everything. Reeves looked at him and nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for what Marcus asked, for having the patience to let truth work." Reeves said, "That takes more strength than most people have." Everything changed in the hours following Morris's arrest. Reeves's team immediately began pulling Morris's cases from the past 15 years. They began reviewing the files. They began investigating the arrests. They began understanding the scope of what Morris had been doing. 93 traffic stops, 78 involving Black and Hispanic drivers, 81 resulting in searches, mostly for drugs, always for something, 42 resulting in arrests. And then they looked deeper. They looked at the cases where Morris had testified, where Morris had been the primary investigator, where Morris had provided evidence. They found 23 convictions, 23 people serving time based partially on Morris's testimony, 23 cases where Morris's integrity or lack thereof had directly affected the outcome. They found his text messages, messages to other officers about easy pickings, messages about which neighborhoods had residents less likely to lawyer up, messages about needing to keep heads down, messages about quotas and targets and how to make the numbers look good. They found his personal communication with other officers that showed a pattern of corruption that extended beyond just Morris. It showed a culture within the department that tolerated and sometimes encouraged exactly this kind of behavior. They found that Morris's supervisor had known about complaints against Morris, multiple complaints, and that supervisor had downplayed those complaints, had encouraged Morris's behavior implicitly by not stopping it. Sarah Chen, the woman who Morris's evidence had convicted 6 years ago for a crime she didn't commit. Sarah Chen's case became the first one they reviewed in detail. The evidence Morris had presented against her was circumstantial. The evidence Morris had testified about was vague, but it was Morris's testimony that had tipped the scales. It was Morris's authority that had made the difference. Sarah Chen had served 6 years in prison before new DNA evidence proved her innocence. 6 years. Her daughter grew up without her. Her career was destroyed. Her reputation was destroyed. She was released with an apology and some monetary compensation, but nothing could replace what she had lost. Now, with Morris arrested and his methods exposed, there was hope that her case could be officially exonerated, that her conviction could be overturned. The federal judge who reviewed Morris's cases was named Elizabeth Hartford. She was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being fair but uncompromising when institutional corruption was involved. The hearing took place in a federal courthouse, in a room designed to make normal people feel small and unimportant. But Sarah Chen and the other victims weren't normal people anymore. They had been victimized by the system. They were there to demand that the system acknowledge what it had done. Sarah Chen testified. She described what it was like to be arrested for a crime she didn't commit. She described what it was like to be in prison for 6 years. She described the impact on her daughter who grew up visiting her mother behind glass. She described the impact on her career, which had been derailed before it began. She didn't cry. She was too controlled for that. But there was a quality to her voice that made clear the depth of what had been taken from her. Other victims testified. A man named Robert Jackson, who had spent 8 years in prison for drug charges that Morris had fabricated. A woman named Michelle Torres, who had been arrested multiple times on pretexts created by Morris. Each arrest damaging her record further. Each arrest making it harder to find employment or housing. The evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was thorough. The pattern was undeniable. Agent Reeves presented the financial analysis. She showed how Morris's arrests had been concentrated in specific neighborhoods, how those neighborhoods had the highest concentrations of minority residents, how Morris had told other officers that these neighborhoods had low legal pushback, meaning the residents were less likely to hire lawyers or fight charges. She presented the text messages. She presented the recorded threats. She presented Marcus's documentation. Judge Hartford listened to everything, and when it was concluded, she issued her ruling. Detective Morris engaged in a pattern of abuse of authority and misconduct that extended across at least 23 documented cases. These cases are hereby reopened, pending individual review. All convictions that relied substantially on testimony or evidence provided by Detective Morris are automatically subject to appeal and potential overturning. The Chicago Police Department is ordered to conduct a comprehensive review of all cases involving Detective Morris over the past 15 years. Any additional corruption discovered in that review must be reported to the federal government within 60 days. It was not a small ruling. It was a wholesale indictment of Morris's career. It was a statement that justice once violated must be remedied. The news media picked up the story within hours. Federal judge orders review of corrupt detectives' cases. 23 potential wrongful convictions identified. Chicago Police Department under federal scrutiny. Other victims began coming forward. People who Morris had arrested, people who Morris had harassed, people who Morris had targeted. Officer Chen was interviewed by federal agents, and he told the truth about Morris. He described Morris's obsession with Marcus. He described Morris's willingness to fabricate evidence. He described Morris's contempt for the neighborhoods he was supposed to protect. The Chicago Police Department announced a comprehensive internal review of all Morris cases. Department leadership made statements about their commitment to rooting out corruption. These statements were clearly made under pressure from the federal government. Morris's former supervisor, Captain Richard Lang, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation into how he had allowed Morris's behavior to continue unchecked. Morris himself, facing federal charges, found a lawyer and began discussing potential plea agreements. Morris's lawyer reached out to the prosecution with offers. Morris would testify against other officers. Morris would describe the corruption in the department. Morris would cooperate fully in exchange for reduced charges. It was the sound of someone realizing they had lost completely. Marcus didn't attend the hearing. He didn't give interviews to the media. He didn't accept offers to tell his story on podcasts or in documentaries. Instead, 3 weeks after Morris's arrest, Marcus submitted his resignation from the federal building. He had other plans. Plans that had been forming in his mind since the moment Morris had been led away in handcuffs. He rented a small office space in the northwest part of Chicago. He wasn't thinking in terms of profit or business model. He was thinking in terms of need. Sarah Chen needed help navigating the appeals process. Robert Jackson needed someone to document his case for potential civil suits. Michelle Torres needed legal resources. They all needed something that the system had failed to provide: actual support. Marcus called it integrity in service, and he began the work of helping people navigate the legal system that had harmed them. Rosa visited him in his office one afternoon, and she said, "I knew there was something about you. I knew you were more than just a janitor." Marcus smiled. Really smiled. Not the controlled expression he usually wore. "I was exactly what I appeared to be," Marcus said. "A man doing his job. The job just wasn't maintenance." 6 months after Morris's arrest, the first exonerations were official. Sarah Chen's conviction was overturned. Robert Jackson's conviction was overturned. 2 others followed within weeks. Morris received a sentence: 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation after release, his police pension stripped, his certification revoked permanently, his career, the career he had been so protective of, so invested in, was completely destroyed. The Chicago Police Department announced new protocols. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. Civilian review boards were established with actual subpoena power. Quotas were banned. Annual bias training was made mandatory. These changes didn't fix everything. The system was still corrupt in other ways, in other places. But the changes were real, and they were documented, and they meant that something had shifted. The system had been forced to acknowledge its own problems, and that acknowledgement was the first step towards something better. Late one evening in his small office, Marcus received a visitor. It was a young federal agent in his 30s. The agent stood in the doorway with a nervous expression. "Sir," the agent said. Colonel Webb Marcus looked up from his desk. "Yes, my name is Captain James Rodriguez. I trained under you in 2008 at Fort Bragg." Marcus remembered Rodriguez. He remembered the way Rodriguez had struggled with a particular tactical scenario, the way Rodriguez had eventually understood it, the way understanding had transformed Rodriguez's entire approach to his work. "I remember you," Marcus said. "I saw what happened," Rodriguez said. "I saw what you did. I wanted you to know that it mattered, that the things you taught us about integrity, about not compromising principles for authority, they still matter. They're still working in the world." Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming," he said. After Rodriguez left, Marcus sat in the quiet of his office and looked at the photograph he had hung on the wall. It was that same photograph from 30 years ago. Him young, in uniform, standing with soldiers, but next to it he had hung a new photograph. A photograph of Sarah Chen, holding her daughter, smiling for the first time in 6 years. The photograph was captioned, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's just justice that finally arrived." 3 years later, Marcus Webb was no longer invisible. He had become in his own quiet way famous. Not the kind of famous that comes from seeking attention, but the kind that comes from doing something real. His organization, Integrity in Service, had helped 47 people navigate the legal system. 25 convictions had been overturned. 12 civil cases had been settled. New protocols had been established across 3 police departments. Marcus still cleaned sometimes. When he was alone in his office late at night, he would clean his own space with the same methodical attention he had brought to the federal building. The work of maintenance, he had come to understand, was the work of caring for something beyond yourself. Sarah Chen was in her 2nd year of law school. She worked part-time with Marcus's organization, helping other victims understand their rights and options. She had become something of an expert in the specific ways that institutional corruption damaged people's lives. Officer Chen had left the police department. He was now working in community relations, specifically focused on helping communities that had been over-policed and underprotected. Detective Morris was serving his sentence in a federal prison in upstate Illinois. He would be released in 14 months. He would spend the rest of his life on probation, unable to work as a police officer, unable to carry a weapon, unable to use the authority that he had so cherished. The system had changed, but slowly. Slowly enough that it still felt incomplete. Slowly enough that new corruption was still being discovered, but the changes were real, and the direction was clear. Marcus would tell anyone who asked, and eventually people did ask, that he had never set out to be a hero. He had never set out to expose corruption or change the system. He had only set out to do his job and to live a quiet life. But sometimes, he would explain, a quiet life requires you to take a stand. Sometimes invisibility requires visibility. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept a lie and insist on the truth. People often ask me how I stayed calm, Marcus would say in the rare interviews he gave. How I didn't get angry or frustrated when I was being harassed. The answer is simple. Anger is what they wanted. Anger is what would have given them power over me. Silence and documentation and patience. Those things took their power away. He would pause. And then he would add, the most important thing I learned in my 30 years of training people is that power is not about how loud you are or how much authority you claim. Power is about understanding truth, documenting truth, and refusing to be moved by lies. That's the only kind of power that actually lasts. In the end, Marcus Webb's story was not a story about a military colonel who became a janitor and exposed corruption. It was a story about a man who understood that invisibility and visibility are not opposites. They are choices. And sometimes the choice to be visible when it matters most is the most important choice you can make. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice, integrity, and people who changed their world.